On the surface, Nimona is just another movie about a person making an unlikely friend in a troubling time. But obviously, there is something more to this film. Well, it is simply unique from its world building, characters, and story perspective. And I will tell you exactly why Nimona is just the movie we needed in today's world of average, generic films. Straight away, we start with the backstory narration from Nimona, giving the audience a basic understanding of this world, despite her character being introduced 10 minutes later after a bunch of other characters. I'll expand on this later in the video, but the way she narrates that the monsters are always out there plants the seed of doubt as to who she really is. We then get another backstory told in the form of a live news broadcast. I love the two separate backstories for the two separate storylines this film has, which again, I'll explain later. The movie takes place in a futuristic medieval world. It sounds like an oxymoron, futuristic medieval, but I love to think that this world is a representation of this oxymoron, of how no matter how technologically advanced humans can get, we will still always stick to traditions handed from generation to generation, because if we are told something for our entire lives, we never feel the need to question it. Anyway, we find out Ballister, our main character, is a commoner who controversially rose to the ranks of a knight. We are also introduced to Ambrosius, who really puts the bro in his name. The future knights are handed their swords, and I like the little detail of Ballister noticing something is off with his sword and the squire's panicked face when the director comes in. I also love Ballister's voice when he asks if Ambrosius really thinks he is the director's favorite, showing that he really did want to make her proud. The group then lines up to be knighted by the queen, and this is where you truly get to appreciate the animation in this film. It really reminds me of Claws, even though the two were animated completely differently. Also, this scene is where we get the first show of color symbolism. The team has stated that the shadows represent non-acceptance, and as the character got more accepting, they would go into the light. You will notice the queen standing in the spotlight with the director standing in the shadows. But you might have noticed Ballister as well, as he initially sulked in the shadows, but then as he accepted himself as a knight, he steps into the light. I also love the little look the director gives to Ambrosius as he cheers for Ballister. But then, the queen gets lasered. And knowing the symbolism of the lighting, I like to imagine that the flickering, waning lights show how quickly everyone went from accepting Ballister to casting him as a murderer. We cut to Nimona, doing the most vile thing a person can do.
Graffiti.
This will be the last time I mention this, since this film has a ton of it, but we get another show of color symbolism, with Nimona initially in the shadows, before stepping into the light of Ballister's wanted poster. The news calls Ballister all sorts of things that Nimona is used to, and she realizes she has finally found somebody she can relate to. Cue title screen. We cut to Ballister in an unknown location, working on his arm. I love how he put Todd as his primary suspect, and although it is never brought up in the film, Ballister managed to create his own arm with a single arm. Nimona and Ballister meet, and apparently Nimona has never heard of first impressions, as Ballister perfectly describes her.
What is wrong with you?
In case you feel that Nimona was attempting to be cool in front of Ballister, we get our first hint that Nimona isn't as she seems, as she casually touches extremely sharp edges. How Ballister doesn't notice this is anyone's guess. Ballister pleads to know what exactly was going on, and Nimona exclaims that she wants to be his sidekick. Nimona goes on to show what it's like having children, before finally coming to the realization that Ballister isn't a villain. Cue comedic irony as Ballister gets arrested, and I love how the film portrays the guards. But then the director comes in. I was actually pretty invested into the murder mystery, but this conversation makes it painfully obvious that the director was the one behind this, through the way she refuses to listen to Ballister. If she really believed him, she would listen to him. Simple as that. Personally, I feel that the director would have been a better twist villain if she had more screen time in the beginning and didn't have this conversation with Ballister. But moving on, Nimona somehow busts Ballister out, and I just have to mention how much I love Nimona's smile. It's so goofy looking. Speaking of faces, why does Ballister look like this for half the film? Even in the poster! The duo sneak out, with Ballister continuing to make me wonder if he has any situational awareness. He runs into Ambrosius, and I don't get the joke of Nimona saying Gesundheit? How do you say that? But I like how Ballister just stares at Ambrosius before the duo hide. Nimona makes Ballister swear not to freak out, before revealing that she can shapeshift. Nimona shamelessly quotes Shrek as the classic escape sequence begins. I love the way the camera pans during the sequences, as well as how Ballister gets knocked out by the tiniest bit of debris. Ballister wakes up in the lair and realizes what Nimona really is. Now, although Nimona just saved Ballister, you can excuse his hostility towards her, since for his entire life, he's been told monsters are evil. He even copes with this by saying that Nimona wasn't a massive fire-breathing monster. He then asks Nimona why she is helping him, and Nimona displays a brief moment of her true mental state as she states that everybody hates her. Ballister kinda glosses over this and reluctantly strikes a deal with Nimona. Now, I've said this before and I'll say it again, I hate it when emotional moments are immediately followed with shallow humor. This scene had everything going for it, and while I guess Nimona turning into a shark is in her character, I was just so jarred by it. Anyway, Ambrosius then takes on the challenge of capturing Ballister, as he and Nimona attempt to capture the Squire. I love the director's line of "go about your normal lives," as it foreshadows how the director thinks of the common folk. I also love how when Nimona suggests that there is nothing beyond the wall, you can see Ballister's cognitive wheels turn before he pushes it off. Ballister and Nimona go through the subway, and here we see all types of propaganda all over the place. It would be a bit too much for this video to go in depth about how Nimona tackles the dangers of propaganda, but if you want to see a video on that, tell me in the comments, and be sure to like the video if you are enjoying it. Nimona distracts the guards, and I love how it is revealed that Nimona can shapeshift into anything. I wish the fact that being a shapeshifter means that there is no limit on what you can be was utilized more in media. However, Ambrosius manages to not fall for the distraction. Ballister asks Nimona for her backstory, and kinda controversial opinion, but this scene is a one-time gag. I mean, I guess you can be philosophical and say Nimona was truthful, as her going to the well was the moment Nimona finally found someone willing to accept her, and hence she views that moment as the true start of her life. But I think that's just grasping at straws. Ambrosius catches up to Ballister at the station, and I like how Nimona follows along with Ballister despite clearly not knowing what to do. Also, there are no sightline dots on the glass. 0 out of 10, my immersion is ruined! The duo escape and spot the Squire with Ambrosius hot on their trail. We then get the best character in the film, Demon Baby. Oh, and Ballister starts to lose it, even with Nimona. The car breaks down, and while I like the detail of how Ballister was fuming at Nimona just a few seconds ago, as he goes into parental mode when he sees an arrow in her leg, this scene is just awkward. The only notable thing is Nimona saying she feels free when she shapeshifts, probably because she would otherwise turn into this conglomerate. I love the interrogation of the Squire, showing that despite being completely opposite to each other, Ballister and Nimona still managed to get the job done. As for the twist, I've said what I said. On my first watch, I really started to dislike Ballister after this scene, wondering why he wouldn't listen to Nimona, who for once was the voice of reason.
To Ambrosius.
Who cares?
But the Institute has been Ballister's home and dream for his entire life, and if you've been told something your entire life, it is really hard to question it. The scene with Ambrosius and the director is incredibly well done, as Ambrosius struggles to voice his concerns to the director. Nimona and Ballister catch up to them, and Ballister attempts to show Ambrosius what he has, but is foiled by the director. Who could have seen that coming? I like the irony of the director saying Nimona was the one whispering lies in Ballister's ear, even if it is a bit too obvious. Ballister attempts to prove his innocence, but Ambrosius doesn't believe him. Ballister realizes it's time to go metal, and Nimona goes full ape mode. I love this fight scene, and credit where credit is due. I honestly thought Nimona was going to be captured, and was very surprised at the commercial callback. Now this scene was done amazingly, showing just how effective propaganda is. So much so, that a child, who would usually be the one to question the rules set in place, can only see Nimona as a monster, despite her saving their life. Nimona is obviously upset, and she expresses this as she laments on the irony of people seeing her as the monster. We then get the biggest bombshell I've ever seen in recent media, and the main reason I wanted to make this video. Nimona reveals she has suicidal thoughts. From a human perspective, it makes sense. Being told you are a monster, a freak, having everybody hate you, it will do numbers to your mental state. And Nimona has been told that every day for over 1,000 years. Ballister now takes notice of this and immediately says that they will leave, using the word we, surprising Nimona, and it is in that moment that Nimona sees people can change. Nimona assures Ballister that they will stop the director, and they come up with quite the ingenious plan. Nimona pretends to be Ambrosius and demands to talk to the director, where she reveals that she was the one behind all this and stabs the fake Ambrosius. Well, haha, you just got pranked! Because Ballister recorded the whole thing and will now be making an exposing video for the world to see. Also, why didn't the guards freak out at Ambrosius entering once again? 0 out of 10, my immersion is ruined! Anyway, the duo will upload the video, which goes viral. I guess the director couldn't block the internet or whatever. The dance montage here while everyone found out about the truth was alright, but I love the choice of song here. Will this evidence be enough to change the mind of the public? But wait, there's 40 minutes left in the movie. The worst isn't over yet. Ambrosius attempts to contact Ballister, and against all better judgment, he goes there alone. There, it is shown that the director manages to weasel her way out of the spotlight, claiming she had been framed. I love how she emphasizes on how Nimona could be anyone, attempting to sow fear and discourse into the populace. Ambrosia assures Ballister that they will stop her. Stop Nimona, that is. Ballister is confused, and Ambrosius shows ancient texts, showing that Nimona was Gloret's monster. You can see Ballister shaking his head, refusing to believe his friend would do this. Ballister goes back to the hideout, and Nimona questions where he's been. He demands to know if Nimona was the monster in the text, and she doesn't give a straight answer. Nimona threatens Ballister to call her a monster, and as he draws his sword, he severs any sort of connection the two had made. Todd arrives, and Nimona flees, heartbroken at what just happened. Now, I'm going to take a minute here to talk about the ingenious way this conflict was set up. Since the beginning, Nimona has been a wild card. She's been shown to be a compulsive liar, regularly wants to commit violence, and has made a bad impression of Ballister. As for the audience, they now realize that Nimona has always been off. From the beginning monologue to when she says Ballister is perfect, her overall calmness and nonchalance at everything going on makes the audience wonder if Nimona really is who she portrays herself as. And finally, Nimona has never revealed who she really is. And even when all she had to say was a simple yes or no answer, she asks what Ballister thinks of her. Perhaps a desperate attempt to change the topic? It is here that the story shifts from a murder mystery to the classic are you friend or foe, as Nimona flees all the way to a well, kind of like the well shown in her fake story, and then we are shown Nimona's true backstory. We see how she tried to connect with other animals, and eventually stumbled across a little girl, who suspiciously looks like Gloret. Gloret is the first being to take Nimona in, and I love the little detail of how the adults were initially fine with Nimona in her girl form. Nimona shifts in front of Gloret, who isn't sure what to do, but she accepts Nimona, and the two have a wonderful time, until they're caught, and Nimona is outed as a monster. This scene is wonderfully done. Gloret says Nimona is her friend, begging for everyone to stop, but when her parents say she is a monster, she blindly listens to them. Acceptance is derivative. The way people think are often based on what other people around them think, and this film captures this perfectly. Despite being attacked first, Gloret abandons Nimona, who collapses in the present day. Emotions run high in Nimona as she finally loses it and heads towards the city. Once again, the movie does an excellent job in creating doubt in the audience as to what Nimona's plan is. Something, chaos and destruction? The Institute attempts to clear out the area, but it is too late. All the signs and monster warnings only anger Nimona more, and I love how you can hear her scream along with the roar of the monster. The Knights attempt to stop Nimona to no avail. The director's fears are realized, and she heads for the super weapon on the city walls. Ballister rides to Nimona as the director turns into Lord Shen and directs the super weapon into the city, and for the first time, Ambrosius questions everything. Nimona is shown having the same suicidal thoughts and attempts to take her own life. She lets out one final cry of anger, frustration, and sadness, but is stopped by Ballister. Ballister just says 3 lines. He is sorry, he sees Nimona, and she is not alone. Nimona transforms back into her human form and collapses in Ballister's arm. The director, despite seeing all of this, cannot let go of her prejudices and demands to fire on the city. Ambrosius attempts to talk some sense into her, but she refuses to listen. The director starts the weapon, and Nimona knows what she has to do. I love the detail of Nimona as a phoenix, reborn and reinvigorated to do what is right. The director makes one last attempt to be relevant, and the fight ends there. Ballister attempts to find Nimona, but all that is left are pieces of her. Ambrosius consoles Ballister as they finally see what lies beyond the wall. Ballister then narrates what Nimona originally said from the beginning of the film. The city is shown to be thriving, as Nimona is honored by the very people who villainized her. Ballister goes back to the hideout, where everything is still as it was, but then he hears a familiar knock, and Nimona returns. While I personally think that the movie would have hit much harder if Nimona died, I think it's for the best that she came back, showing how no matter what, there is always a light at the end of the tunnel. Although this film is by all means quite generic, it is so wonderfully done. It maxes out the creativity of the world, its characters, and beautifully uses symbolism to portray its message of acceptance, of how everybody has feelings, and of how unless we step back and move away from our own prejudices that we may not even have but are instilled into us, we can never judge somebody for who they are. I'm glad more studios are brave enough to have these types of films that aren't afraid to discuss and tackle tough topics head on using animation. Animation doesn't always need to be for little children, but whatever the case may be, you cannot deny that Nimona is a true masterpiece. Thank you all so much for watching.